In August 1942, a British military photographer documented the liberation of Allied prisoners following a daring commando raid on a German POW camp in occupied France. Among the photographs taken that day was one that seemed to capture the pure joy of freedom. It showed a young British soldier grinning broadly at the camera, his arm raised in what appeared to be a triumphant wave or salute. His smile was radiant, his posture energetic, his entire demeanor suggesting relief and happiness. The photograph became iconic. It was published in British newspapers with headlines like "The Face of Freedom" and "British Tommy's Joy at Liberation." It was used in propaganda materials, in recruitment posters, and later in history books as a symbol of Allied resilience and the success of commando operations. For over 80 years, this photograph represented hope, victory, and the triumph of freedom over captivity. But in March 2024, a researcher examining medical records from the 1942 raid made a devastating discovery. The young soldier in that photograph, whose name had been lost to history, was not waving in triumph. He was signaling for help, and within 30 minutes of the photograph being taken, he collapsed and died. The joy visible in his face wasn't happiness at all. It was delirium from severe internal injuries sustained during his captivity. This is the story of how one of World War II's most uplifting photographs turned out to document not a moment of joy, but the final minutes of a dying man's life, and how that truth was hidden for more than 8 decades. Operation Chariot, conducted in March 1942, was a bold British commando raid on the French port of Saint-Nazaire. The raid's primary objective was to destroy the massive dry dock that could service German battleships, but secondary objectives included gathering intelligence and, if possible, liberating any Allied prisoners held in the area. The main raid at Saint-Nazaire was a costly success. The dock was destroyed, but casualties were heavy. However, a smaller follow-up operation in August 1942, sometimes called Operation Chariot II in unofficial records, focused on rescuing British and Commonwealth prisoners known to be held in a temporary detention facility near the coast. On August 14, 1942, a small force of British commandos conducted a lightning raid on the facility, overwhelming the guards and liberating approximately 35 Allied prisoners who had been captured during earlier operations in France. The prisoners were in various states of health, some relatively well, others showing signs of maltreatment, malnutrition, and injury. Lieutenant Robert Hayes, a British Army photographer attached to Combined Operations Command, accompanied the rescue force specifically to document the liberation. His photographs would serve propaganda purposes, boost morale on the home front, and document conditions in German detention facilities. Hayes photographed the raid's aftermath, the freed prisoners being led to evacuation boats, medical personnel conducting quick assessments, commandos securing the area, and emotional moments of liberation. His photographs were processed aboard the return vessel and transmitted to London within days. One photograph in particular caught the attention of British authorities and the press. It showed a single British soldier, appearing to be in his early 20s, standing in front of what looked like a stone building or wall. He was wearing torn and dirty British Army battle dress, his uniform in poor condition. But his face was lit up with what appeared to be an enormous smile. His right arm was raised high, hand open, in what looked like an enthusiastic wave or victory salute. His posture was energetic, almost bouncing on his feet. The image radiated pure joy. Lieutenant Hayes' caption for the photograph read, "Freed British prisoner celebrates liberation, Saint-Nazaire region, August 14, 1942. Subject unidentified, but clearly overjoyed at rescue by British forces. The photograph was immediately selected for publication. It appeared in the Daily Mail on August 18, 1942, with the headline, "Tommy's Triumph, the Smile That Says It All." The accompanying article described how British commandos had heroically rescued prisoners from German captivity, and how the freed soldiers were jubilant and overjoyed at their liberation. The photograph was reprinted in numerous newspapers and magazines throughout the war. It appeared in propaganda posters, encouraging enlistment with captions like, "This is what we're fighting for, freedom." It was used in morale-boosting materials distributed to troops. After the war, it became a standard image in history books, illustrating POW liberation operations. For over 80 years, the photograph was universally interpreted as showing a moment of pure happiness. A young man celebrating his freedom, waving to his rescuers, expressing joy at being saved. No one knew his name. The official caption simply called him "unidentified British prisoner." Efforts to identify him over the decades had failed. There were no clear identifying marks visible in the photograph, and records from the rushed evacuation were incomplete. And no one knew that within 30 minutes of the photograph being taken, that smiling young man was dead. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a military historian at King's College London, was researching a book about British commando operations in 1942. In March 2024, she was examining medical records from Operation Chariot II, looking for information about casualties and the condition of rescued prisoners. Among the medical documents, Dr. Mitchell found a field medical report filed by Captain James Thornton, the medical officer who had accompanied the rescue operation. The report, dated August 14, 1942, documented the medical assessment and treatment of the rescued prisoners during their evacuation. Most entries in the report were brief. Prisoner number, malnutrition, minor injuries, stable for transport. Or prisoner number, evidence of beating, fractured ribs, requires hospitalization, but stable. But one entry was significantly longer and more detailed. It was labeled Prisoner Number 17, critical case, deceased during evacuation. Dr. Mitchell read the entry with growing concern. Prisoner Number 17, British Army, rank unknown, identity not yet established. Initial assessment, prisoner appeared energetic and responsive, exhibiting what seemed to be euphoria at liberation. However, medical examination revealed severe abdominal distension and bruising consistent with internal injuries. Prisoner reported being beaten by guards 2 days prior to liberation, with significant blows to torso. Despite outward appearance of well-being, prisoner showed signs of shock, including rapid pulse, 140 beats per minute, cold extremities, and pale skin beneath visible grime. The report continued. Prisoner was photographed by Lieutenant Hayes shortly after liberation, appearing to wave or signal. Within approximately 20 to 30 minutes, prisoner collapsed suddenly. Emergency examination revealed signs of massive internal hemorrhage, likely from ruptured spleen or liver damage, sustained during beating. Despite immediate intervention, prisoner's condition deteriorated rapidly. Prisoner became unconscious approximately 15 minutes after collapse. Death occurred at approximately 16:45 hours, estimated 45 minutes post-liberation. Cause: internal hemorrhage from blunt force trauma to abdomen. Prisoner's initial energetic behavior, likely due to adrenaline response and euphoria of liberation masking severity of internal injuries. In retrospect, prisoner may have been attempting to signal distress rather than celebrate, but this was not understood at the time. Dr. Mitchell sat back, stunned. She immediately thought of the famous photograph, the smiling, waving British prisoner. Could this medical report be describing the same man? She checked the timing. Lieutenant Hayes' photographs were taken shortly after the liberation, around 1600 to 1615 hours, according to his log. The medical report indicated prisoner number 17 collapsed around 1635 to 1645 hours and died at 1645 hours. The timeline matched perfectly. Dr. Mitchell examined the photograph more carefully, now looking for signs of medical distress rather than joy. What she had always seen as an expression of happiness now looked different. The smile could be a grimace. The wave could be a signal for help. The energetic posture could be the restless movement of someone in severe pain trying to stay upright. She needed to confirm whether the photograph showed prisoner number 17, and she needed to find out who he was. The medical report noted that identification had not been established at the time of the evacuation. Had his identity ever been determined? Dr. Mitchell began searching through casualty records, trying to find documentation of a British prisoner who died during or shortly after the Operation Chariot's second evacuation in August 1942. Dr. Mitchell's search through casualty records was complicated by the chaotic nature of the 1942 commando operations. Many records were incomplete, misfiled, or lost. The rescued prisoners had been taken to multiple locations for medical treatment, and some documentation had been destroyed during the war. However, Dr. Mitchell found a War Office casualty list from August 1942 that included an entry that caught her attention. Private Thomas Hadley, East Surrey Regiment, age 23. Date of death, 14th August 1942. Location, during evacuation from France, following liberation from enemy captivity. Cause, internal injuries sustained during captivity. Body recovered and buried at Brookwood Military Cemetery, Surrey. The date, location, and cause of death all matched the medical report about prisoner number 17. Dr. Mitchell searched for additional information about Private Thomas Hadley. She found his service record. Thomas Hadley had enlisted in 1939 at age 20, was deployed to France in 1940, and was captured during the Dunkirk evacuation when his unit was cut off and surrounded. He had been held in various German detention facilities for over 2 years before being moved to the coastal facility near Saint-Nazaire in mid-1942. Hadley's service record included a physical description. Height 5 feet 9 inches, brown hair, slight build. It also included a pre-war photograph showing a young man with a round face, prominent ears, and a distinctive gap between his front teeth. Dr. Mitchell compared this description and photograph with the liberation photograph taken by Lieutenant Hayes. The physical features matched. The same round face, the prominent ears visible in the liberation photo, and crucially, when she examined the liberation photograph under high magnification, she could see a gap between the subject's front teeth. This was Thomas Hadley. The joyful prisoner in the iconic photograph was Private Hadley in the final minutes of his life, suffering from massive internal bleeding, his apparent happiness actually delirium and distress. Dr. Mitchell found additional documentation. After Hadley's body was returned to Britain, his family had been notified of his death. A letter from the War Office to Hadley's parents, dated September 1942, explained that their son had died shortly after being liberated by British forces as a result of injuries sustained during his captivity. He was buried with full military honors. Please accept our deepest condolences for your loss. The letter was formal and brief, offering no details about the circumstances of his death or the fact that he had appeared healthy enough to be photographed minutes before his collapse. Dr. Mitchell located Hadley's surviving family. Thomas Hadley had never married and had no children, but his sister's granddaughter, Emma Chambers, age 56, was still living in Surrey. Dr. Mitchell contacted her in April 2024 and explained her research. Emma agreed to meet with Dr. Mitchell and shared what family stories had been passed down about Thomas. "My grandmother, Thomas's sister, told me that Thomas died after being rescued from a German prison camp," Emma explained. She said the family received a telegram saying he'd been liberated, and they were overjoyed. Then just days later, another telegram arrived saying he had died. My great-grandparents were devastated. They thought he'd survived, that he was coming home, and then suddenly, he was gone. Emma continued. My grandmother said the War Office told them Thomas died from injuries he'd received while imprisoned, but she never knew exactly what happened. She always wondered if he had suffered, if he knew he was dying, if he was scared. Those questions haunted her for the rest of her life. Dr. Mitchell showed Emma the famous photograph and explained what the medical records revealed, that Thomas had appeared joyful but was actually dying, that his wave might have been a signal for help, that his death came within minutes of the moment captured in the image. Emma stared at the photograph for a long time, tears streaming down her face. So this photograph that's been used to show the joy of liberation, it's actually showing my great-uncle dying? Dr. Mitchell consulted with Dr. William Foster, a trauma surgeon and military medical historian, to understand exactly what Thomas Hadley had experienced in his final hour of life. Dr. Foster reviewed the medical report and the photograph. This is a tragic case of internal hemorrhage that was masked by the psychological and physiological effects of liberation, he explained. Hadley had sustained severe blunt force trauma to his abdomen 2 days before the rescue. The medical report indicates he was beaten by guards. This trauma likely caused a splenic rupture or severe liver laceration. Dr. Foster continued. In cases of severe internal organ damage, bleeding can be initially slow and then suddenly catastrophic. Hadley probably experienced significant abdominal pain over the 2 days following his beating, but he was a prisoner in enemy hands with no medical care. He endured it. Then, when the British commandos arrived and liberation happened, his body experienced a massive adrenaline surge. Adrenaline does several things, Dr. Foster explained. It increases heart rate, redirects blood flow, and most importantly for understanding this photograph, it can create a sense of euphoria and mask pain. Hadley was probably experiencing severe abdominal pain, but the psychological joy of liberation combined with the physiological effects of adrenaline temporarily made him feel better than he actually was. His energetic behavior was partly genuine happiness, but also partly the hyperactivity that adrenaline creates. Looking at the photograph, Dr. Foster identified specific medical signs visible in Hadley's appearance. His posture is actually quite telling if you know what to look for. His body is leaning slightly to one side, which people do unconsciously when they have severe abdominal pain. They're trying to reduce pressure on the injured area. His raised arm, the wave, is actually at an odd angle. It's not a natural waving motion. It looks more like he's trying to signal or reach for something. Dr. Foster explained what happened next. As the adrenaline wore off, Hadley's blood pressure, which had been artificially maintained by the adrenaline surge, began to drop. The internal bleeding, which had been relatively slow, became catastrophic, probably because his increased heart rate and blood pressure from the excitement caused the damaged vessels to bleed more rapidly. When his blood pressure dropped below a critical threshold, he collapsed. By the time he collapsed, he'd probably already lost a significant percentage of his blood volume internally, Dr. Foster said. The medical officer's report indicates he became unconscious quickly and died within about 10 minutes. This is consistent with hemorrhagic shock. Once the body reaches a certain level of blood loss, consciousness is lost, and death follows rapidly without immediate transfusion and surgical intervention. Dr. Foster paused before adding, "The tragic irony is that if Hadley had been in a hospital with immediate access to surgery when he collapsed, he might have been saved. But he was on an evacuation boat in the middle of the English Channel. The medical officer could do nothing but watch him die. And the worst part is that for those crucial 20 or 30 minutes between the photograph and his collapse, everyone thought he was fine. They thought he was happy. No one realized he was actively dying." Looking at the photograph one more time, Dr. Foster said quietly, "This isn't the face of joy. This is the face of a dying man having a brief moment of adrenaline-fueled euphoria before his body finally gives out. It's heartbreaking once you understand what you're actually seeing." Emma Chambers, Thomas Hadley's great-niece, spent weeks processing the revelation about the photograph. Dr. Mitchell had given her copies of all the documentation, the medical report, the service records, and, of course, the photograph itself. In May 2024, Emma agreed to a recorded interview with Dr. Mitchell to share her family's story and their reaction to the discovery. "My grandmother Margaret, Thomas's sister, was 19 years old when Thomas was captured at Dunkirk," Emma explained. "She told me that the 2 years he was a prisoner were agony for the family. They received a few Red Cross letters from him saying he was alive, and as well as could be expected, but they worried constantly. When they received the telegram in August 1942 saying he'd been liberated, my great-grandmother apparently fell to her knees crying with joy. They started planning his homecoming, preparing his room, talking about what they would cook for him." Emma's voice broke as she continued. Then 3 days later, the second telegram arrived. "Deeply regret to inform you that Private Thomas Hadley died on the 14th of August, 1942, as a result of injuries sustained during captivity." My grandmother said her mother screamed when she read it. The whiplash of emotions, from despair during his captivity, to joy at his liberation, to grief at his death, it destroyed something in my great-grandmother. She never really recovered. She died just 2 years later in 1944. The family always believed she died of a broken heart. Emma shared letters that had been preserved in the family. Margaret had written to a friend in September 1942. "Thomas survived 2 years as a prisoner. He survived beatings and starvation and cold. He survived until British soldiers came to rescue him. And then he died anyway. The War Office says it was injuries from his captivity, but they won't tell us details. I keep thinking, what were his last moments like? Was he in pain? Did he know he was dying? Did he think of us? These questions torment me, and I'll never have answers." Dr. Mitchell had shown Emma the medical report, which finally provided some of those answers. "Knowing the truth is both comforting and devastating," Emma said. "It's comforting to know that Thomas was rescued, that he saw British soldiers, that he experienced a moment, even if brief, of hope and relief. The medical report says he seemed euphoric at liberation. That's something. He didn't die thinking he was abandoned or forgotten. But it's devastating to know that he was dying during that moment," Emma continued. "To know that the joy everyone thought he was feeling was partly delirium from internal bleeding. To know that he might have been trying to signal for help and no one understood. To know that he died just minutes later, probably in terrible pain, probably confused about what was happening. Emma looked at the photograph that had been used for decades as a symbol of liberation and joy. This photograph has appeared in so many books, so many articles, always presented as showing happiness and freedom. But it's actually showing my great-uncle in his final minutes, bleeding to death internally, his brain flooded with adrenaline that made him seem happy when he was actually dying. That's not inspiring. That's tragic. She paused, then added, "But I'm glad the truth is finally known. Thomas deserves to be remembered accurately, not as a propaganda symbol, but as a real person who suffered terribly and died just when he thought he'd been saved. His story isn't uplifting, but it's true. And truth matters more than propaganda." Dr. Mitchell published her findings in the Journal of Military History in June 2024. The article, titled "Liberation and Death: Re-examining an Iconic 1942 Photograph in Light of Medical Evidence," detailed her discovery and its implications for how we interpret historical photographs. The article explained, "For over 80 years, this photograph has been presented as documenting a joyful moment of liberation. It has been used in propaganda, in historical education, and in commemorative materials as a symbol of Allied success and prisoner resilience. However, medical records reveal that the subject, Private Thomas Hadley, was dying of internal hemorrhage at the moment the photograph was taken. His smile was likely a grimace or delirium. His wave may have been an attempt to signal distress. His energetic posture was the restless movement of severe pain and adrenaline response. He died approximately 30 minutes after this photograph was taken." Dr. Mitchell continued, "This case demonstrates the danger of projecting desired narratives onto historical images without examining primary source documentation. We wanted this photograph to show joy, so we saw joy. We wanted it to show triumph, so we saw triumph. But the medical reality tells a different story, a story of a young man who survived years of captivity only to die in the moment of his rescue, his suffering unrecognized by those around him." The article sparked significant media attention. The photograph had been so widely used that many people had seen it in textbooks, museums, or documentaries. News outlets reported on the discovery, with headlines like, "Iconic World War II liberation photo revealed to show soldiers' final minutes," and "The hidden tragedy behind a famous image of freedom." The Imperial War Museum, which had displayed the photograph as part of their POW exhibition, immediately updated the display. The new caption read, "Private Thomas Hadley, East Surrey Regiment, photographed moments after liberation from German captivity, August 14, 1942. For over 80 years, this photograph was interpreted as showing a prisoner's joy at rescue. Medical records discovered in 2024 revealed the tragic truth. Hadley was suffering from massive internal bleeding from injuries sustained during captivity. The happiness visible in his expression was actually adrenaline-induced delirium masking severe trauma. Hadley collapsed approximately 30 minutes after this photograph was taken and died shortly thereafter, never making it home to Britain. This image serves as a reminder that photographs can be misinterpreted when divorced from their complete historical context, and that behind wartime propaganda images often lie untold stories of individual suffering and tragedy. The museum exhibition now displays the photograph alongside Thomas Hadley's pre-war portrait, his service record, and excerpts from the medical report documenting his death. A screen shows excerpts from Emma Chambers' interview. sharing her family's story. Emma attended the updated exhibition opening in August 2024, which coincided with the 82nd anniversary of her great-uncle's death. Speaking to reporters, she said, "For my family, Thomas's death has always been a source of pain, but also confusion. We knew he died after liberation, but never knew exactly what happened. Now we know. It doesn't make it easier, but it makes it real. He's not just a face in a photograph anymore. He's Thomas Hadley, a real person with a family who loved him and mourned him." She continued, "I think it's important that people know the truth about this photograph. Thomas suffered terribly. He endured beatings that killed him. And in his final minutes, people were taking his picture thinking he was happy, when he was actually dying. That's not a feel-good story, but it's his story, and he deserves to have his true story told." Dr. Mitchell reflected on the project. "This discovery changed how I look at all historical photographs, especially wartime images. We have to ask ourselves, what are we assuming about this image? What do we want it to show? And what does the documentary evidence actually tell us?" In Thomas Hadley's case, 82 years of misinterpretation were corrected by a medical report that had been sitting in an archive the whole time. How many other photographs are we misinterpreting because we haven't found the full context yet? The British Army officially recognized Thomas Hadley's story by adding his name to the memorial wall at the National Memorial Arboretum, with a notation, "Private Thomas Hadley, East Surrey Regiment, 1919 to 1942. Liberated from enemy captivity, died of injuries sustained during imprisonment. His suffering was unrecognized. His story is now told." Emma Chambers had the final word. "My great-uncle Thomas didn't get to come home in 1942. He didn't get to see his family again. He didn't get to live the life he should have lived. But now, at least, his truth is known. He's not just the happy prisoner in a propaganda photo anymore. He's Thomas Hadley, a man who suffered, who survived as long as he could, and who died just when he thought he'd been saved. His story is tragic, but it's real, and that matters more than any propaganda narrative ever could. This is Thomas Hadley's story, misunderstood for 82 years, finally revealed by medical records that showed the heartbreaking truth. The young man who appeared to be waving in joy was actually dying. His apparent happiness, a cruel trick of adrenaline and delirium in his final living moments.